We're going to pick up here. There we go. All right. If you're playing at home, we're going to summarize. We have a little technology issue. So we have 4 issues we're going to talk about in this chapter. 4 types of learning. It's easy to see that in Roman numeral 3 and 4 that these are learning issues. But if you look at Roman numeral 1 and 2, you see the word conditioning. I want you to write down conditioning equals learning. The word conditioning equals learning. If you've been conditioned, you've learned. Conditioning is occurring, learning is occurring. It's just another word for learning. We're going to start in the beginning with classical learning or classical conditioning. It's defined on your PowerPoint. And if you can't underline this word, this is the key. This is the type of learning that talks about reflexive and reflexive responses. We said a stimulus, any event, experience, or object that brings about a reaction. These are defined in your book. So stimulus brings about a reaction, which is a response. So response is defined as reaction. So a stimulus, and then you see the arrow, brings about a response or reaction. If that response or reaction is involuntary or automatic, it is called a reflex. You blink when someone blows in your eye, you salivate when someone gives you a piece of gum, or you smell your favorite food, or then you kick your leg if the doctor hits you just below the knee in the right spot. You know what reflexes are. So we talk about this guy, Pavlov. Important guy, studying digestion, knows a lot, wins a Nobel Prize in 1904 in medicine and physiology about the human digestive system, but he starts learning about it by studying animals. So he gets a lab after he wins the Nobel Prize. He sets up this lab, and there's the picture of a dog, and what he's standing on is actually a tabletop. So there's lots of these dogs on this tabletop. You see him in a harness, and you see this bowl of food, and the bowl of food, again, is really not real. They're not eating any food because that thing on the side of his mouth is surgically put there to collect saliva. So his throat is actually sewn shut. So the food there, the bowl, is really just symbolic. He's getting powder put on his tongue, or she. He's getting powder put on their tongue, and they have a reaction that's involuntary. It's salivation. Just like if someone put food on our tongue, we would start to salivate. So the dogs would start to salivate with meat powder put on their tongue. And he is going to, his intent is to explore, when do we start salivating, how much do we salivate, when do we stop salivating, what is the role of salivation in the digestion process. So he goes into this study with that intention. And the background story is, so he's got a lab assistant. And Pavlov himself is very regimented. He's a very good scientist. He's got all these policies and procedures written down of how this study is going to work. And he says to his research assistant, I need your help. And his research assistant is thinking, I work for a Nobel Prize winner. I'm very cool. I'm going to make a good name for myself. Pavlov says, here's all you got to do. Come in the morning. I've got these forms. You pick up the clipboard. You note the time. And you go through and you feed, well, you're not really feeding. You're going to put food powder, meat powder, on the tongues of the dogs. You're going to go dog 1, dog 2, dog 3, dog 4, all the way down the line. You're going to come back, note the time, and then start how much saliva has collected in dog 1's beaker on the side of its mouth. It's an etched beaker. How much is in there? You're going to write it down. How much for 2? You're going to all the way down the line. You're going to go back, do another time check. Now how much does dog 1 have? Dog 2. And you're going to do this until they stop salivating. I'm going to make it easier for you. I've got this ticking sound that's going on. In your book, you're going to hear he later starts using a metronome. Tick, 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 tick. But originally they say there was some kind of ticking sound, but sometimes you'll hear it called a bell. If anyone ever heard it referred to as a bell, okay, so we use the bell. It probably wasn't really a bell, it was probably a tick sound, but that's okay, we're going to call it a bell because lots of textbooks do. So, okay, so this sound is going to go off, this bell is going to go off and tell you when to start. So you're going to go in, the bell's going to go off, time for the meat powder. Go back, pick up your clipboard, time check, dog 1, dog 2, to how much saliva is collecting in their beaker. Okay, you guys getting this? Research assistant says, same thing, that's so easy. I'm going to have a good job. This is so cool. I'm working for Pavlov. How hard can this be? Goes in day 1. Sound goes off. Bell ding. Meat powder, meat powder, meat powder, meat powder, meat powder, meat powder. Picks up his clipboard. Time check. How much is in dog 1, dog 2, dog 3? It goes so nice and smooth. time check now. How much is in dog 1, dog 2's beaker, 3, all the way down. Goes great. That whole session goes wonderful. Second session runs somewhat similar. By the time the third session runs around, third and fourth, he started noticing something unexpected happen. Comes into the lab. Ding, the bell goes off, the sound goes off. He goes to put meat powder in, meat powder, meat powder, meat powder, meat powder. Gets to the last dogs, the last few dogs, and he's noticing a little bit of saliva in their beaker already. And he runs back and he picks up the clipboard, kind of checking, he's getting, and he's a little concerned because, why is he so concerned? Because we salivate to food being on our tongue. The dogs were salivating, a reflexive response to food touching their tongue, because we salivate in our bodies. Our body is getting geared up. What does saliva do? It breaks down food. So when food gets in the mouth, your body goes into action. It's a reflexive response to start breaking down food. Well, these dogs are already salivating and there's no food in their mouth. He's getting a little worried. So that one gets him on alert. Goes home, comes back later on that day for the next one, the bell goes off. Meat powder, oh my gosh, they're all salivating. And I haven't put meat in their mouth, powder. And he gets really nervous. And the story goes, he falsified the data. And he didn't put that they were salivating then. Because he thought, he can't. How can I screw this up? It was so easy. And he creates this false data. And he doesn't want to fess up. And Pavlov comes in at some point to check on the data. And he's looking at it, he's like, ooh, very interesting. I don't know what voice sounded like, but oh, this is so interesting. And then, luckily, the research assistant, the guilt, overtakes him. And he says, that's not the real data. Pavlov says, I don't understand what you're saying. Well, that isn't what really happened. And he says, what do you mean what really happened? He said, this is actually the real notebook. I changed stuff because I was nervous. Why would you be nervous? How hard is this? He's like, well, look. So Pavlov opens up the real data and looks at it. And he's looking at it and he said, do you mean then that they started and you hadn't even? And he's going, whoa. And the research assistant, I'm so sorry, I know what I did wrong. And Pavlov said, let me get this straight. You came in and as soon as that sound went off, they were already salivating? And the research assistant is saying, by the end, yes. And as soon as I opened the door, as soon as I walked in, before the bell even went off, they were salivating. By the end of this, I don't know what I did wrong. I don't know what's happening. And Pavlov, he's no dummy, he's looking at the data, and he realizes, this is early 1900s, he looks at it, he realizes he's got in his hand the first captured data of this very basic form of learning, where you can learn to have a reflexive response, and in this case, physiological response, to something that is completely neutral. It should never bring about this response. He realizes that they've captured, in scientific ways, in data, a form of learning that no one has captured. People have talked about it. They've not captured the data. He's so smart that what he's looking at, he never intends to study simply digestion again. He becomes one of the most famous researchers in learning for the rest of his career, because he's that smart. He knows what he's got in his hand is a gold mine, scientifically speaking, research speaking, that this is amazing. And he doesn't let it go. And it was this interesting turning point. Now, why is that interesting? Dogs salivating, no big deal. Because it's something cool. Like, he realized that, can I break your personal space? Okay, he's going, yeah, wait for me. For us, it would be something like this. If I blow in your eyes, I don't know if I can bagel bar, sorry. But if I blow in your eyes, what are you going to do? Okay, but what is your face going to do if you can't move? Your eyes are going to blink. That's a reflex. If I did it to anyone, you would blink. Okay? So blow, blink, blow. I won't ever do it to anyone. Blow, blink, blow, blink, blow, blink. Yeah? Okay? Now what if I stomp every time before I blow? Stomp, blow, blink. Stomp, blow, blink. That's the conditioned response. He's learned, conditioned, to respond to not the blowing anymore because that has been paired with the stomp. So now what Pavlov made us realize is I can walk over here, stomp, and he is going to blink. And he learned that association without even realizing he learned it.
So
that's pretty cool. Huh?
So it's just brainwashing?
It's not brainwashing. It's we have to learn this, evolutionarily speaking, to function well. In our society, we've got to make these associations all the time to realize what comes with what leads to what in our world.
So it's like going to the doctors and like your blood pressure going up because you're nervous.
It's called white coat syndrome. That's a perfect example. You walk in and they go take your blood pressure, like, why your blood pressure's really high? And you're thinking, because I'm freaking nervous. I don't know why.
That's why they take it at the end.
That's why you take it at the end. That's why they try and get it as soon as you get there, before you have a chance to build your anxiety. They'll try all these tricks.
My friend has to have a separate doctor's appointment.
Huh?
My friend has to have a separate doctor's appointment to take her blood pressure.
She has to have a separate doctor's appointment to take her blood pressure because she gets so nervous just being there. See, my dog was like that. The vet had to come out to the car. He couldn't, just being in there, he would like melt down. He's a big German Shepherd. You didn't want them melting down. So the vet's like, I'm just coming out to the car. And so we tried to avoid that whole thing in the animal kingdom, the same thing we do in the human kingdom, this whole association of fear. That is absolutely a great human example of classical conditioning. So he realized that just now, the dogs, what was happening in Pavlov's study is you rang the bell and they started salivating. But they shouldn't have, but they did because they made a connection. So we're going to go through his terms, and you're going to create a little diagram. And leave space. The diagram is going to be several lines long, like maybe 8, 9 lines long. So leave space. You're going to keep adding to it. If you want to put it in the margin, you are going to need this diagram. You're going to need to recreate this diagram. It's an important diagram. Okay? All right, the first of his terms is called a UCS, an unconditioned stimulus. Be comfortable with the little shortened acronyms of them, UCS. This is a stimulus that naturally leads to a reflexive response. Naturally. No prior learning needed. It just happens in the world. So add to your book's definition. It just happens. No learning. Unconditioned. Do you remember what conditioned means? Conditioned is another word for learn. There's no learning occurring here. Unlearned stimulus. You didn't have to learn anything. It just happens in the world. That's why it was important to know that conditioning is another word for learning. There's no learning that occurs here. This stimulus is just naturally going to lead to a UCR, the term below, an unconditioned response. Again, unlearned, reflexive, because we're talking about classical conditioning. An unlearned reflexive response. It's automatically brought about by the UCS. So these two terms go together. A UCS brings about a UCR. When? Always. It just does. It just happens in the world. Some stimulus, without learning, brings about, pardon my coughing, brings about some response. Okay, so now you're going to start a diagram. UCS, then the one-sided arrow means brings about. Your book uses the term elicits, just means brings about. UCS brings about a UCR. In the real world, no learning necessary, because it's unconditioned. So something unconditioned brought about some response unconditioned. In Pavlov's study, what brought about what? What just always does, whether he was doing the study or not. What brings about what in his study? What was the first word?
Food.
Food, perfect. Food brings about salivation. Food makes dogs and people salivate. Food brings about salivating. It just does. And think about this. It's not learned. So this is always where you start this diagram. This is where you're going to start it. With the two things that require no learning. Unconditioned stimulus brings about an unconditioned response. No one has to teach a baby to start salivating to get that Cheerio down. Nobody says, hey, psst, little, come here. If you don't start salivating, you're going to choke to death. Nobody says that. No learning, it just happens. It is a reflexive response to food entering the mouth. Okay, so we're going to start the diagram there. All right, next thing on your outline. We have an NS and a CS. NS is defined as a stimulus that normally has no effect on the desired response. It's neutral. Normally has no effect. Just hanging out there doing nothing. Should have no effect on the response we're looking at. And then I put right on your outline, the NS becomes the CS. And the CS is defined. It's, oh, there's a typo. It's an initially, not a initially, an initially neutral stimulus that eventually brings about a conditioned response. So the CS was initially neutral, but it becomes conditioned, and it's going to bring about this thing called a conditioned response. So let's add to our diagram. We're going to add to the left and below. There's an NS. Oh. So the NS, I already put it out there. The NS in Pavlov's study was that thing that should have no effect on salivating. The thing that should have no effect on salivating, the bell. If I rang a bell right now, none of you should salivate. And if you did, that would be kind of funny. And I want to talk to you about what meal times like at your house. Because maybe you set your alarm every day on your cell phone to remind you to eat because you're so busy. Then that would make sense that every time your alarm went off, you started to salivate. That's classical conditioning. And I want to talk to you about that.
But is it true, like you read about stuff like that, it ends up happening? Like they said, if you see a person yawn, or you hear a person yawn, it makes you sleepy, it makes you yawn.
Okay, you pick the one area that I can't talk intelligently about, yawning. You know why? Yawning is like this mystery in the science world, and I challenge any of you to come back to me with something recent on yawning that explains why yawns are contagious. I have looked, I've had students look, and I haven't had anything happen since last spring, so see if there's anything else out there. Come back and tell me. Yawning is this interesting mystery. There's these theories out there about why we yawn, and the theory for humans is different than the theories for animals, which I'm interested in that. Why do we yawn, but a lion yawns to become more alert, but we yawn to start winding down? I don't know. I don't know the answer. So A, we don't know exactly why we yawn, and B, why they're contagious. Could it be classical conditioning? I'm going to put my money on it, but I can't say it intelligently because we don't know enough about yawning.
It was on my SATs, and I fell asleep.
What?
It said if you read about yawning.
Now wait, you're going to say, because there was a question concerning yawning, on your SATs you fell asleep?
Yes.
Okay, it does not come out and smack you in the face and say, go to bed, my man. That is some serious influence of a word.
I woke back up and I was like, oh snap. Still did good though.
I don't think that you could have been tired.
No.
I don't know if it has that kind of power.
So what about like when someone is reconditioned? Would that still follow the same rules like in the military? Like we're taught to do everything different. Like,
Yeah.
We're not supposed to put our hands in our pockets. You know, you're supposed to carry your bag in one hand, and like I still do that stuff without even thinking of it. So does that follow the same rules?
Well, putting your hand, choosing which hand to pick up a bag with is voluntary. So keep that in mind because we're going to start talking about operant conditioning next, Roman numeral 2, when we come back next class. That is about voluntary behaviors. So that's not here. That would be under voluntary behaviors. But in the military, you're going to see a lot of classical conditioning too. So just think about how it could be applied. Okay, so we've got this NS that eventually becomes the CS. Now it becomes the CS. The CS is the same thing as the NS. We just call it something different. CS now. Why? Look at the dotted line. Please make it dotted. Going from the NS to the CS. Make it look differently than that other arrow. The arrow between the UCS and the UCR indicates that term elicits or brings about. This dotted line is really special. When the NS becomes the CS, learning has occurred. And I always put a little sound to it because it's a big deal. So if you see it, you can feel free to sing or pump or make a sound. Because the NS has been paired with the UCS. Something neutral has been paired with something that always brings about a reflex. Because of that pairing, that plus sign, if you're writing this, write over this plus sign more than once. Remind yourself, it's usually after repeated pairings. Occasionally, one pairing is enough. We'll talk about phobias. But normally it's repeated pairing. In a Pavlov study, it was repeated pairing. Bell plus food equals salivating. Bell plus food equals salivating. So it's repeated pairing, and then all of a sudden, occurs, and just the bell alone is going to bring about this thing called a CR. So that of the dotted line is learning occurring. When the NS becomes a CS, learning has occurred. CS conditioned because they've learned. When you see CS, you know learning has occurred. UCS, there's no learning. Unconditioned. CS conditioned. Learning has occurred. So the CS is going to bring about this thing called the CR, the last one on the neuron. It was originally reflective response, but now it's brought about by the CS. So the CR used to be originally reflexive, but now it's happening not even in a reflex to the original stimulus. Now it's brought about by this thing. It shouldn't have anything to do with it, but it does now. It does now. The CS is going to bring about or elicit the CR. What is the CR in Pavlov's study? Anyone have an idea? If I said, right now, this is for a quiz point, what is the CR? You all know? Jonathan? What do you think? Yeah. You got it. Salivating. So that is your diagram. Write it, know it, love it. If you can reproduce this, there is not a question on classical conditioning that can ever stump you. This is really classical conditioning 101 in this little diagram. And you always start where there's no learning. The UCS bringing about the UCR. This relationship just happens in the world. Somebody blows, you blink. Food is put in your mouth, you salivate. It just happens. It's unlearned, unconditioned. And then something gets paired with that thing. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes on accident. Either way, occurs. Learning occurs. And now that thing that was once neutral is no longer neutral. Learning has occurred. It's now the CS. It's going to bring about the CR. Look at this diagram. Are there any diagonal lines? Any crisscrossing? No. A UCS. Underline the U in UCS one time and the U in UCR one time. Underline those U's one time. It's just a little visual reminder to you. UCS brings about UCR. Underline the CS twice, the C in CS. C twice in CS and C twice in CR. I want you to visually make that connection. U brings about U, C brings about C. Visually draw yourself into that. So you start with UCS, bring back the UCR, the NS gets paired, occurs, learning occurs. Now just the CS will bring about the CR. Just the bell alone will bring about salivating. Okay. Do you guys know The Office?
The show.
The sitcom The Office?
You were? Yeah.
Let's watch a little bit of this. Oh, that's not what I want. Look at that. All right. When in doubt, YouTube. Link It's on TV. It is a very boring paper, a place that sells paper in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And the whole storyline is there's a documentary being filmed the whole time. You never see the documentary crew ever. But you get these moments where they're filming people having like a private conversation, and they'll be behind a plant, zooming in. People go into the break room and have, it's like reality TV at the confessional. So they go into their break room and they have these individual talks with the camera. So you have to know that background or it looks really like a crazy show. And of the characters, there's, in this office, they're all characters. Probably the most normal is Jim. So Jim is going to be in here. Jim takes a lot of pleasure out of making fun of, in particular, Dwight. Dwight is like the office door. Okay. So one thing you got to know about Dwight background is he loves Altoid mints. You guys know what those are? The Curiously Strong mints. They're called Curiously Strong. Those started in Great Britain. If you have Altoids on you, that is hilarious. Those are Altoids. Now, interesting thing in our market, they had to tone them down. The Americans didn't like them as much as they did in Great Britain. And they're still, even in our market, when you take an Altoid, you put it in your mouth and you're going, ow, it kind of hurts, A. And B, that's a funky taste. What's that? You can't stop yourself. You put another one in. But it leaves you with this funky taste in your mouth after. You're like, well, it's got to be better than what I used to smell like. I don't know what that smell is, though. But it's Curiously Strong. That's their title. So a couple things. Dwight loves Altoids, and you got to know that Altoids leaves that funky taste in your mouth after. Okay, those are important to know for this clip. Blow this up. So it's not a very bright picture, but you'll get the whole thing. All right, and remember that computers, when they reboot, they go, they make that funny noise. That's key in here too. Okay, here we go. That's the way you back. He says, what do you think?
In school, we learned about this scientist who trained dogs to salivate to the sound of a bell by feeding them whenever a bell rang. So for the past couple weeks, I've been conducting a similar experiment. Okay. Alto. Neighbor.
Now watch. Now listen to what he says.
On that, they're talking about that the Big Bang Theory. He did it with her too, with dolls, like with the bell
That's
shapes.
operant conditioning. We're going to bring up the Big Bang Theory next week. Definitely.
There's actually just an example of classical conditioning, like last week on How I Met Your Mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it sounds like every time Barney would sneeze, Marshall would want to go to like a hibachi grill place.
Every time he would say, let's go to the hibachi grill, he would sneeze immediately after. And then he eventually started sneezing, and Marshall would say, let's go to the hibachi grill.
Oh, interesting. Now, the only thing I would say, it's where it was located. Was he sneezing and then saying it, or was he saying it then sneezing?
Like Marshall would say it, then he would sneeze, but then eventually he would sneeze and then.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought up that example. That actually looks good on TV, but scientists would say, he's got to sneeze first. The NS has to come before the UCS. If you put it after Pavlov tweet this, they don't make that association as well. Almost, and in some situations, they don't make the situation. So if you sneeze and then say, let's go to hibachi grill, and then eventually just sneezing will ring the bell.
He would say, bless you to him every time.
Okay.
So he was recognizing that he was sneezing.
Okay. I'm going to have to watch that and see if it's a good one. Okay. I love the show. Okay. All right. Yeah, because if you can't find psychology in sitcoms, what's the point of taking Psyc101, right? That's what I thought. here. When we come back, we're going to end lecture. We're going to pick up with important concepts of classification. Stop.